When you finally understand that no one truly cares about your struggles, your excuses, or your setbacks, you become untouchable. Because the moment you stop expecting sympathy, you reclaim pure power. Stay for the next 9 minutes, and I'll give you 6 Machiavellian tactics that turn this painful truth into your greatest advantage. Niccolò Machiavelli believed one of the greatest illusions is the belief that others are invested in your success. They aren't. People care only as long as you're useful, entertaining, or beneficial. But here's the paradox: when you accept this brutal reality, you gain strategic freedom. You stop seeking validation. You stop explaining yourself. You stop bleeding energy. Here is the first truth you must accept. If you want to rise in a world that moves on without looking back, people care about you only as long as you are convenient, entertaining, or useful to them. The moment your struggle becomes too heavy for them to carry, they quietly step back. This is not cruelty, it is human nature. And the sooner you sever your emotional dependence on others, the sooner your mind becomes a weapon rather than a wound. Most people live with a silent expectation that someone will eventually show up to understand them, rescue them, or validate their suffering. But Machiavelli understood something far colder. Expectation is the birthplace of weakness. When you expect care, you begin to shape your behavior around the reactions of others, and without realizing it, you hand over control of your peace, your confidence, and your sense of identity. The severance principle begins with a single shift. Stop assuming that anyone is obligated to feel what you feel. When you emotionally detach from the need to be comforted, you start to see the world with a clarity that the dependent mind cannot access. You stop reading into people's tone. You stop wondering why they didn't check in. You stop replaying conversations in your head trying to decode whether someone secretly cares. Their silence becomes neutral, not personal. Their distance becomes information, not injury. Their indifference becomes expected, not heartbreaking. The reason detachment feels painful at first is because you are breaking a psychological addiction. A lifetime of conditioning taught you to seek emotional reinforcement from those around you. You were told that love, support, and understanding were the default state of human relationships. But Machiavelli saw the world not as it should be, but as it is. People prioritize their survival, their comfort, their social image, their ambitions. And when your pain becomes an inconvenience, they instinctively minimize it. Severing emotional dependency is not about becoming heartless. It is about becoming sovereign. The moment you stop expecting anyone to save you, something extraordinary happens inside you. Your energy returns. Your self-respect increases. Your decisions sharpen. You stop chasing people who have shown you repeatedly that their concern is conditional. You stop hoping that someone will change. You stop seeking closure from people who don't even offer clarity. You reclaim the emotional resources you wasted on trying to be understood. And here is the most Machiavellian part. When you detach from the expectation of care, you become more powerful in every social environment. You no longer react with desperation. You no longer negotiate from insecurity. You no longer crumble when someone withdraws approval. Indifference frees you from their influence. The severance principle demands that you learn to operate from internal stability rather than emotional dependence. If someone supports you, appreciate it, but don't rely on it. If someone disappears, accept it instantly. If someone misunderstands you, let them. You owe no emotional explanation to anyone. And the less you expect care, the more dangerous you become, because everything you do comes from strength rather than need. When you switch from "I hope someone cares" to "I only care about mastering myself," your entire life pivots. Pain no longer paralyzes you. Loneliness no longer frightens you. People's inconsistency no longer destabilizes you. You start to move like someone who carries their own weight. Someone who no longer seeks validation but generates it internally. Someone who understands that the world respects the self-contained far more than the emotionally dependent. There comes a moment in every person's life where they realize that waiting for someone to help them is the fastest way to stay exactly where they are. That moment is the beginning of the self-reliance engine. This is the internal machine that turns you from someone who hopes the world will assist them into someone who assumes the world will not. Machiavelli understood that dependence breeds weakness, and weakness invites exploitation. When you rely on others for motivation, support, or direction, you hand them the power to decide your pace, your growth, even your destiny. But when you build yourself with the assumption that no one will step in, you become unstoppable, because your progress is not held hostage by anyone else's willingness. There is a harsh but liberating truth hidden inside this idea. Most people will not help you, not because they hate you, but because helping you offers them nothing. Human beings operate on a simple internal equation: effort must be rewarded, and offering assistance to someone who has not yet demonstrated strength feels like effort with uncertain returns. That's why the world tends to support those who are already rising, not those who are still crawling. The self-reliance engine begins developing the moment you stop waiting for the world to recognize your potential and start crafting your capabilities in silence. You take responsibility for your path, your time, your skills, and your outcomes. You stop blaming circumstances, because blaming only delays action. You stop seeking shortcuts, because shortcuts rarely build anything that lasts. You understand that the life you want will come from the work you do, not from the help you hope to receive. And here is where the Machiavellian edge becomes clear. The more self-reliant you become, the more respect you subconsciously command. People instinctively follow those who don't demand anything from them. Someone who can stand on their own feet, make their own decisions, and create their own results becomes a figure of quiet authority. Self-reliance is not just a personal advantage. It is social currency. People trust strength. They gravitate toward confidence. They align themselves with stability, and nothing is more stable than the person who is not shaken by whether others show up or not. When you operate as if all responsibility lies on your shoulders, the world feels your weight. Your tone changes, your posture changes, your discipline sharpens. You begin moving with the calm certainty of someone who does not need rescuing. But building this internal engine is not a motivational fantasy. It is a practical daily commitment. It means getting things done when you don't feel inspired. It means learning skills that no one will applaud you for yet. It means staying consistent long before anyone notices. It means becoming your own source of pressure, your own source of standards, your own source of momentum. You begin treating yourself like a sovereign state under your command. Your skills become your soldiers. They protect you from irrelevance. Your habits become your walls. They protect you from inconsistency. Your purpose becomes your ruler. It directs your decisions with clarity and force. The self-reliance engine grows strongest when you embrace solitude. Solitude is not loneliness. It is strategic incubation. It is the space where your will hardens, your ideas evolve, and your identity forms without interference. In solitude, you don't ask, "Who will help me?" You ask, "How can I become so capable that help becomes irrelevant?" And once that mindset takes root, everything changes. You stop viewing obstacles as unfair and start viewing them as necessary. You stop waiting for inspiration and start creating discipline. You stop needing validation and start generating progress. When you realize that you are the architect, the builder, and the enforcer of your own life, your reliance on others dissolves and your power finally begins to grow. There is a psychological trap that silently weakens millions of people. The expectation that someone will eventually understand their pain. They wait for empathy, for recognition, for someone to validate the silent battles they've been carrying alone. But Machiavelli would tell you that sympathy is not a guarantee. It is a luxury, and one that very few people ever receive without offering something in return. This is the heart of the sympathy vacuum. It is the realization that the world rarely stops to acknowledge your suffering unless it benefits them in some way. And once you accept this, you stop waiting for emotional rescue and begin moving with a colder, more strategic clarity. People often misunderstand how sympathy works. They think it is driven by compassion, but compassion is selective. Humans feel deeply only when they are personally affected, entertained, or morally rewarded. That means your pain is invisible unless it serves someone's ego, narrative, or image. This is why opening your heart to the wrong audience feels like speaking into a void. They hear you, but nothing echoes back. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology gave it a label. He knew humans are self-interested creatures who prioritize their own stability over another person's struggle. They might nod, they might pretend to understand, but their emotional investment has limits. And the moment your story becomes too draining or too complex, they detach. The sympathy vacuum begins the moment you stop taking this detachment personally. Instead of feeling rejected, you start seeing it as information about human nature. You realize that waiting for someone to feel your pain is like waiting for the world to pause just because you're tired. It won't. And the longer you wait, the more powerless you feel. But once you stop expecting sympathy, something radical happens inside you. You stop leaking emotional energy. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not listening. You stop rehearsing your struggles for an audience that isn't invested. You stop hoping someone will see your suffering and give you the encouragement you crave. And then your mind becomes sharper. Because with no expectation of emotional rescue, your decisions become cleaner. You start evaluating situations based on facts instead of feelings. You stop taking offense at neutrality. You stop resenting people for failing to show up emotionally. You start treating their indifference as the normal setting of human behavior, not as betrayal. With this shift, you reclaim enormous psychological power. The sympathy vacuum teaches you to replace emotional storytelling with silent execution. You no longer narrate your pain, you convert it into fuel. You stop talking about what hurt you, and you begin acting on what will strengthen you. In Machiavellian terms, silence becomes your strategic ally. When you stop broadcasting your struggles, you instantly become harder to read and harder to manipulate. People can no longer calculate your vulnerability because you are not handing them the information. They cannot pity you, judge you, or use your emotions against you because you reveal nothing that exposes your internal state. You move through life like a locked fortress, no open gates, no easy entry points. This controlled silence forces people to interpret you through your results, your discipline, and your presence, rather than your wounds. And this reverses the power dynamic. Instead of seeking empathy, you become someone others quietly respect because you endure without theatrics. The sympathy vacuum transforms you from someone who waits for emotional validation into someone who generates momentum without it. You stop asking, "Why doesn't anyone care?" and start asking, "Why am I giving away the power to affect me?" Your suffering no longer becomes a request for comfort, it becomes a forge. And while others seek attention for their pain, you build strength from yours. There is an uncomfortable truth most people never want to accept. Human relationships, whether personal or professional, run on utility. People care about you to the extent that you are useful to their goals, their comfort, or their self-image. This is not cruelty. This is not cynicism. This is Machiavellian realism, the kind of realism that frees you from disappointment and gives you the power to maneuver among people who are driven by their own interests. The utility equation is simple. The more value you create, the more attention, respect, and loyalty you receive. The less value you offer, the faster you become invisible. And once you understand this, you stop trying to earn affection and start focusing on becoming strategically indispensable. This truth becomes obvious the moment you examine your own behavior. Think about the people you admire. You admire them because they embody something valuable: skill, confidence, stability, intelligence, success. You admire them not because they begged for your care, but because they projected strength without asking for anything. Now flip the perspective. The world sees you the same way. People connect with you based on how you make their lives easier, richer, clearer, or more meaningful. They withdraw when your presence becomes a burden, when you drain more energy than you give, or when you stop being a source of momentum. And while this sounds harsh, it's actually liberating. Because once you stop assuming that people should care for emotional reasons, you start focusing on the real currency of influence: value. Machiavelli famously noted that alliances last only as long as they benefit both sides. The moment one side loses its usefulness, loyalty dissolves. Modern psychology confirms the same principle. People maintain relationships that benefit them and distance themselves from those that don't. This is why being a good person is not enough. This is why being loyal is not enough. This is why being kind is not enough. These traits matter, but they do not create power. Power comes from being someone whose presence offers something others cannot easily replace. When you are irreplaceable, people tolerate your flaws. When you are replaceable, they magnify them. The utility equation demands that you evaluate yourself with ruthless honesty. Are you someone who elevates rooms or someone who drains them? Are you someone who solves problems or someone who creates them? Do you bring clarity or do you bring confusion? Do you contribute momentum or do you require saving? Once you ask these questions, you stop chasing people who don't value you and start becoming someone they can't afford to lose. You shift from seeking acceptance to building relevance. And relevance changes everything. When you become valuable, through discipline, capability, insight, competence, people stop overlooking you. They stop doubting you. They stop dismissing you. You become someone they consider, someone they consult, someone they respect. The utility equation turns you into a force that shapes outcomes because people instinctively want to stay aligned with those who bring strength rather than chaos. It is not about becoming a people pleaser. It is about becoming a strategic asset. You don't bend yourself to fit others' expectations. You build yourself so powerfully that they adjust themselves to fit around you. And here is the Machiavellian twist. Once you understand that value is the foundation of influence, you stop taking other people's behavior personally. If someone pulls away, you don't internalize it. You analyze it. If someone loses interest, you don't chase, you evaluate. If someone disrespects you, you don't beg, you withdraw your utility. You understand that people respond to incentives, not emotions. They stay where value exists and leave where it fades. So instead of fighting this truth, you use it. You make yourself the kind of person whose consistency, focus, and output create an environment where others naturally want to remain close. You become the person whose contribution is too valuable to ignore, too rare to replace, and too strong to overlook. There is a moment in your life when you finally understand that explaining yourself is the fastest way to lose authority. The more you justify, the more you reveal. The more you reveal, the more people evaluate, judge, and weaponize your words. And the more you talk, the less mysterious, less powerful, and less respected you become. This is the heart of the silent rebellion, the decision to stop giving people access to your inner world and to start using silence as your shield, your armor, and your strategic advantage. Machiavelli understood the fatal mistake most people make. They speak too much. They share their plans. They broadcast their fears. They expose their frustrations. They talk as if the world is a safe container for their vulnerability, but the world is not a container. It is a marketplace. Everything you say becomes a commodity that others use to measure your strength, your intentions, and your weaknesses. And once people identify your emotional patterns, they can influence you, control you, or dismiss you. The silent rebellion is the refusal to hand them that power. When you stop explaining yourself, a shift occurs in the social dynamic. People become unsettled. They cannot predict you. They cannot categorize you. They cannot read your intentions. And this psychological fog forces them to respect you more than they expected. Silence creates a vacuum, and human beings hate empty spaces. When you say nothing, they fill the silence with their own assumptions. And more often than not, those assumptions are in your favor. They imagine you as more confident, more stable, more disciplined, more self-contained than you may actually feel. The less you say, the more they project, and their projections often elevate you. Silence does something else that most people never consider. It protects your emotional sovereignty. Every time you explain your struggle to someone who isn't invested, you weaken your connection to your own strength. You externalize your problems instead of mastering them internally. You try to ease the pain through words instead of confronting it through discipline. And the moment you seek validation through explanation, you become dependent on the reaction you receive. The silent rebellion ends that dependency. It teaches you to sit with yourself, to process quietly, to think strategically rather than emotionally. You stop leaking your inner chaos into the world and start refining it into clarity. And there is another layer, one that Machiavelli would consider essential. When you operate in silence, people cannot sabotage what they do not know. They cannot destroy plans that have not been spoken. They cannot interfere with decisions that have not been revealed. They cannot challenge motives that have not been shared. Secrecy is a fortress, and silence is the gate. When you close that gate, you prevent external influence from infecting your direction. You begin to move with the precision of someone who does not require approval, applause, or permission. Silence also transforms your presence. When you speak less, your words gain weight. People listen more carefully. They treat what you say as intentional rather than impulsive. You create contrast. Your silence becomes the canvas on which your words appear sharp, deliberate, and meaningful. This is the opposite of those who speak endlessly, drowning their own authority in noise. Your silence becomes a form of power not because it hides your thoughts, but because it shows you are not governed by the desperate need to be understood. But perhaps the most powerful effect of the silent rebellion is the psychological freedom it gives you. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop seeking permission to be who you are. You stop negotiating your identity. You stop defending your choices. You stop performing for an audience that was never truly invested. Instead of living reactively, you begin living decisively. Instead of waiting for others to validate your path, you choose it. Instead of worrying about opinions, you become guided by outcomes. And without the weight of explanation, you move faster, think clearer, and act with a decisiveness that makes people reconsider underestimating you. Silence is not emptiness. It is control. It is the refusal to let others shape your narrative. It is the discipline of revealing only what strengthens you and concealing what slows you down. It is a rebellion not against people, but against the parts of yourself that once felt obligated to impress, justify, or seek understanding. Through silence, you reclaim your autonomy. Through silence, you reclaim your power. Through silence, you evolve into someone whose presence speaks louder than their words ever could. There comes a point in every person's evolution where they realize the most valuable power they will ever hold is emotional control. Not the forced, artificial kind that cracks under pressure, but the sovereign kind. The kind that makes you unshakable regardless of who approves, who leaves, who misunderstands you, or who tries to destabilize you. This is the essence of the emotional sovereignty doctrine. It is the Machiavellian understanding that your emotions are political territory, and anyone who can influence them gains power over you. Anyone who can destabilize you owns you in that moment. And the only way to rise above the chaos of human behavior is to rule yourself with a level of discipline and clarity that others cannot penetrate. Most people operate like open kingdoms. Their emotions are public, exposed, and easily manipulated. Someone's silence ruins their day. Someone's disrespect becomes a week-long obsession. Someone's rejection sends them spiraling. Someone's opinion makes them question their worth. And the world sees this vulnerability even when they think they're hiding it. When people notice that your emotional state reacts instantly to external triggers, they unconsciously classify you as someone who can be influenced, redirected, and controlled. Machiavelli would say, "You are a prince who cannot protect his borders. You may have ambition, but you lack defense." The emotional sovereignty doctrine changes this entirely. It begins with one ruthless shift. Your emotions belong to you alone. They are no longer public property. They are not up for negotiation. They are not shaped by external validation or external chaos. You decide how you feel, how long you feel it, and what you do with those emotions. This doesn't mean suppressing everything. It means mastering everything. It means learning to pause before reacting. It means analyzing before emoting. It means responding with strategy instead of impulse. You stop giving people the satisfaction of seeing you flinch. You stop allowing the world to set the tone for your inner state. You stop letting disrespect trigger self-doubt, and instead let it trigger analysis. Why did they act this way? What is their motive? What advantage do they think they have? And how can you turn this moment into leverage rather than weakness? Emotional sovereignty also means refusing to let temporary feelings derail permanent goals. The average person abandons routines, dreams, and commitments the moment their mood drops. They let fatigue decide their discipline. They let sadness dictate their focus. They let frustration hijack their productivity. When you become emotionally sovereign, you no longer obey your moods. You command them. You understand that feelings are weather, not laws. They pass, they change, they lie, they exaggerate. And if you build your life according to emotional forecasts, you will constantly rebuild from ruins. Machiavelli would remind you that rulers do not change strategy every time the wind shifts. They remain unwavering, controlled, stable. Another layer of emotional sovereignty is understanding the power of delayed reaction. When something triggers you, you do not jump. You pause, you observe, you process. This single habit changes your entire life. It prevents enemies from reading you. It prevents manipulators from gaining reinforcement. It prevents emotional vampires from feeding on your energy. And it forces people to confront the unsettling truth that they cannot access your internal world. They cannot drag you into their drama. They cannot make you bend. Your calm becomes a psychological mirror that reflects their chaos back at them. When you become emotionally sovereign, you also stop depending on others to regulate your inner state. You no longer chase reassurance. You no longer look for permission to feel worthy. You no longer seek emotional rescue. You stop waiting for someone to comfort you, validate you, or tell you that what you are doing is right. You become your own regulator, your own encourager, your own stabilizer. You learn to sit with discomfort without collapsing, to process fear without freezing, to acknowledge pain without surrendering to it. And when you operate from this level of internal control, the world treats you differently. People sense a presence that is grounded, disciplined, and difficult to influence. They interact with you more carefully. They respect your boundaries without you having to announce them. They recognize your composure as authority. Emotional sovereignty is the final transformation in accepting that no one is coming to save you, not emotionally, not mentally, not psychologically. And instead of fearing that truth, you embrace it. Because once you realize that your emotional stability is under your rule, everything you build becomes stronger, everything you pursue becomes clearer, and everything that once destabilized you becomes irrelevant. Now you understand the truth Machiavelli would whisper to any ruler: no one cares. And that is your liberation. You learned the severance principle, cutting emotional dependence, the self-reliance engine becoming unbreakable, the sympathy vacuum, replacing emotion with execution, the utility equation, mastering strategic value, the silent rebellion, using silence as a shield, the sovereign mindset shift, becoming self-governing. The world respects those who command themselves. Claim your sovereignty today.